Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's great to meet up again with Mark, who I was at university with. It's great to see Paul in the audience, who's the headmaster of my old school. So in a strange way, I feel in a comfortable home environment. And I'm also very grateful that you've rejigged the timetable, because I have to get back to the House of Lords for 3:30 for a vote. Let me tell you a little bit, first of all, about who I am. So as you've heard, I was the schools minister for 3 of the last 5 years. I was the longest serving schools minister in the last government, and then electoral gravity caught up with me, and a very kind, outgoing Prime Minister decided it would be a good idea to give the nation Baron Knight, and that is who I am. And now I do various bits of work with people like Intel, Apple. I do some consulting with EC Harris, for example. I'm doing some work with the independent school sector on their international exports, where people are looking to sell schools overseas. I do a lot of work with TSL, the publishers of TED, on their digital side, on their resources, where they've got 1.7 million teachers worldwide downloading about 3 resources every second during November. There was 2.9, I think. And then I'm also involved in various trusts around e-learning and around education business links. What I want to really get into today is the role of technology in education and how important I think technology is. And the starting point has to be, there's no replacement for people. There's no replacement for great teaching in the classroom, being really well led in schools, supported by parents. So technology is just a tool. It is nothing more than that. So on its own, it doesn't make any difference. But if it's used well, all the evidence says that it improves attainment. And what I'll go on to say in a minute is that in many ways, you can just digitise what you're familiar with. And I'll talk to you about that. But first of all, I'll just show you what the evidence says the implementation of a digital school looks like. So, as I said, if you've got decent resources, great teaching, the teachers have got good ICT skills, and it's well led, then you get that sort of positive journey through with appropriate deployment, good learning opportunities, not just in ICT, but then across the whole of the curriculum, and then you get the improved learning and the improved outcomes that we're all after. And I guess that's why you're all here, because you're interested in the possibility and the reality of technology delivering better outcomes. And I think we're also moving into a different age. There's a mess of text, for which I apologise, but it's such a great quote, I wanted to put it all up. And it also amuses me there's Andreas, who works for OECD in charge of PISA, and given that most jurisdictions around the world are currently beating themselves up about how badly they're doing in PISA, I thought, well, he must have some authority. And what he is saying is, if we look backwards in trying to look forwards, then you'll end up with rote learning, you'll end up with bored children, and it shouldn't be any surprise if they lose interest and drop out. Now, I'm sure that's not the case in your schools, but certainly what Andrew says, and now even what Michael Gove says, is that technology has an important place. So this is what he said last week at the Schools Network Conference. This was the first time we saw the Secretary of State really saying something positive about the importance of technology in transforming education. And that I'm very pleased to say I welcome hugely Michael's words on technology. Now, in order to get the improved outcomes, I think we need to balance what I would describe as the supply and demand in how the school works, how the school system works. So we want improved outcomes. What I define by improved outcomes is raise achievement, improve skills, narrow attainment gaps, certainly across the whole system between pupils from richer backgrounds and poorer backgrounds. And that then means, to me, that you need sort of high-quality, personalised interactions and experiences in good schools supported at home on the demand side by parents engaging and exciting learners. And there are various ways that you do that. We're very familiar with effective schools, with strong curriculum, with rigour, with leadership, with great teaching. We're familiar, I've just been in a session talking a little bit about e-assessment, but assessment and data systems driving improvement. And then on the home side, parents getting engaged in their children's learning. The most important thing for, according to the academics, for the attainment of a child is the engagement of their own parents in their learning. And then opportunities to learn beyond the school and extend learning, not just during the school day, but beyond. And technology can then play a part in enhancing that. I talked a bit about TES resources, I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute, but communication with the school, parental support for the learner, choice of learning outcomes, much more engaged experience, the ability to tailor assessment, which I'll talk about in a moment too, and then technology skills, resources, leadership at the school end. I think we're very familiar with the supply side of that. We're very familiar with what the schools are doing. What is less developed across school systems is the demand, is the releasing the power of parents and pupils. And I think that's an area that we could do more with, and I think in your sector, where your parents are also your customers, it's particularly important, and where we've probably got a lot to learn from this sector for those of us who are also thinking about the wider school systems as a whole. And I think that voice has more of a place in many ways than choice, because for most parents, they haven't got loads of kids. They choose their school once or twice in a child's lifetime. Once they've made that choice, they're very, very unlikely to withdraw their child from the school and send the child somewhere else because of the social impact that that has on their child. So I think that's a bit of a distraction. It's important, but it's not as important as voice. My advice to schools is to pull those parents in as hard as you can, and I know many of you do it, until they become pushy. And in some ways we want parents to be pushy, because if they're pushing you, then they're also pushing and engaging with their kids. And as long as they're not trying to get you to allocate resource at the expense of other children, but pushing your school, your teachers, that class to do better, subject by subject and across the piece, then I think that's a really good thing. And in order to do that, they need to be informed. As consumers, to be effective consumers in any kind of market, we need to be informed. And in many ways, that's what I'm talking about on the demand side of the equation. And that means publishing data, being transparent about what's going on, publishing quite fine-grained data. And again, Michael Gove's been very good at that. At a system level, he's now wanting to push a lot more data out, and I very much welcome that, and I want to see that school by school. And finally, you've then got to put a decent front on it. And in this day and age, I don't know how many of your schools have apps, but in this day and age, a website I don't think is good enough. Happily, my children are now old enough that they're no longer at school, but if they were enrolling at a secondary school, certainly I would be expecting as a parent to have an app so that I can have information pushed at me that's personalised to me and my children, and so that I can follow how they're doing, when they're turning up, seeing what they're studying today, when they come home from school. Most teenagers are pretty uncommunicative about how they got out of school. You're lucky to get a monosyllable in response to how the day was. Whereas if you know what's been going on, if you know how they've done in their work, getting that real-time information back from the school through a decent front end, probably on your smartphone, then you can start to have a more informed and more intelligent conversation with them about how they're doing. And then the other thing we've got to do is to accept that learners are changing too. So we're moving from this book generation where people, I won't say that was my experience at Elton College necessarily, but it wasn't far off. We weren't quite drilled by rote, so there was a little bit more to it than that, but it was fairly passive. We were certainly learning based on an agrarian year, and we were very proud of the language lab, but there wasn't much in the way of technology going on, but that's not surprising because it was some time ago. But unfortunately, that's the same in some schools now. But that book generation has made way briefly to a screen generation who are somewhat more active. They're still, to some extent, confronted by technology, but they're involved in it more, but they're still bound by learning at certain times of the year only, for example, and not learning from each other. Whereas this interactive generation that I think is now emerging, and these are the learners that we've all got to educate, are expecting to be able to learn whenever they want, and to be much more drawn into intuitive forms of learning and research-based learning, more responsible for their learning and learning from each other, as we all do and as we do when we move into the world of work. And with it, you need, you need an engaging pedagogy. And yeah, this is something that I stole from Google Image, as with most of my slides. And so it's a school, I think, in the States, but it could be a school a few years ago. I hope there aren't too many left like that. It's quite similar to the prep school environment that I went to school in. And then that's more like a lot of the schools that I visit now. Yeah, it's in colour. Some are putting up their hands. This is also good. That shows some engagement and some interactivity, but it's not that dissimilar from what it was. That's a school I visited last week in the West Midlands, the RSA Academy in Tipton. Bit better. You can see some new technology and some old technology. There's a pen being wielded there as well as a laptop, working in groups, more imaginative, flexible use of space. And then that's a school in Bolton where every child has a handheld device and their results have soared in the last 2 years since they did that in a very deprived environment. That's the ESSA Academy in Bolton. So a more engaging pedagogy, I think, starts to emerge. More social learning, as I said earlier, more learners learning from each other. And if you're releasing the teaching potential of learners, I mean, it's the most effective way of learning is if you have to start passing it on to something else, as long as that's moderated by the expert in the room, the teacher. But that can be a much more effective use of the teacher time. I put in the dreaded word Facebook, which I know scares scares teachers and head teachers quite a lot, but I've also seen some brilliant use of Facebook groups by schools, in classes, in subjects, to drive some of that social learning. I've seen brilliant use of wikis as well. The pedagogy embraces collaboration, develops those sorts of skills that in my year as employment minister, employers were telling me all the time education wasn't giving them. Collaboration, communication, teamwork, leadership, all of those soft skills coming through, and learning by inquiry. And yesterday I was at a conference and heard from a secondary school deputy head teacher. His Twitter is @DeputyMitchell, for those of you who do that kind of thing. What he's done in the last 2 years with blogging has transformed the literacy of some of the children that were really struggling. They have doubled their attainment in the last 2 years. So each of the last 2 years they've advanced at double the rate in terms of their literacy scores, because kids are just going home and writing. They're writing about their day, their parents are engaging with what they're writing, and crucially, other people, apart from just the teacher, are commenting on the writing of children. So you're suddenly engaging a lot more adults, you've got their friends commenting, they're understanding their audience when they're writing, and writing to their audience. It's very powerful. Skills with employers and parents. I'm also pleased to see in today's Guardian that there's now the beginnings of a recognition that we need to get computer science back into schools and into classrooms, to get coding into the curriculum. You know, it's a wonderful way, I think, of making maths more engaging. Many of you will be familiar with turtle geometry and the pedagogic thinking behind that by, I can't remember the academic's name, Seymour Papert. There we go, thank you. Use the audience interactivity work very well. Papert's turtle geometry, where children, they understand what a triangle is, but they don't necessarily understand the maths behind the triangle. They're asked to program a turtle to create a triangle, and by coding that turtle, very basic bits of coding, they in the end understand the maths behind how you make a triangle and any other form of geometry. And that sort of pedagogy is only really possible now with technology, but coding in the end is a crucial 21st century skill for people leaving school, leaving education and going into the workplace. You know, if as a country we don't have enough people with those sorts of technical skills, as China emerges, as labour moves to Africa, whose economies are growing really well at the moment, China are now looking to us to understand how we get the innovation, how we get the science, how we do have the imagination that our education system already produces. And yet, if we don't have the computer science and the coding, we're going to lose that competitive advantage globally. And then real-time assessment. I think the possibilities for reassessment are very interesting. Some of you will have heard of the Khan Academy. That's it's a website, but it's a good example in maths learning of being able to go online, look at lessons, but be assessed as you go, so you're pushed the learning that you need, and you're being reassessed all the time as you go forward, and to some extent using gaming psychology of achieving levels so you can move on to the next level. Yes, okay. This is a new slide. I put it on the train, so I forgot much of this one. Yes, what I was saying earlier, some teachers I know are quite scared of this because it is, to some extent, new pedagogy. But I think we can explain to teachers that in some ways it's familiar stuff, you're just digitising it. And Diana Lorillard, who's a professor at the London Knowledge Lab at the Institute of Education, gave a brilliant inaugural lecture to the London Knowledge Lab where she talked about this. So we're familiar with lecturing, with what I'm doing to you now in this sort of slightly inflexible space, and learning through attention. And we have lectures, presentations, books, etc. that do that. We're all very familiar with that. That works digitally too, with the wonderful PowerPoint, but digital videos, animations, podcasts, very much one-way broadcasting digital technology and digital learning. We're familiar with learning through production, with writing essays. I wrote a lot of essays when I was at school, haven't written so many since. I also really enjoyed doing performance, learning through production. The digital equivalent, again, producing PowerPoints, producing websites, designing apps, the wonderful Apps for Good program that I'm involved in through charity. But again, a digital equivalent of what we're familiar with. Learning through inquiry, going to the library, or going to digital libraries, going to Google, learning through practice, practical work. Problem sheets, practice exercises, lab work, workshop work, very familiar, nothing threatening about that. So why should more interactive simulation, gaming, be threatening? It's a digital version of what we're familiar with. And then learning through discussion. When I was at school, we had some group discussion, we had some seminar working, we had some tutorial working, certainly when I was at university. And now that collaboration is one of the great advances that we can accelerate through technology. Collaboration again, lab work, small group work, field work, central part of the tradition of education can all be done digitally. So in some ways, I just wanted to show that slide just to give you some of the tools to argue with teachers who are resistant that this isn't threatening. This isn't about completely learning how to teach all over again. It's about a more digital way of doing what you're already doing. I quickly mention resources. The TSL stuff is just one. The Guardian's got some stuff going on. There's a number of different people who are putting up a lot of online resource. And teachers starting to share resources with each other. So the over 100,000 resources that TSL have got are pretty much all user-generated teachers deciding to share stuff with each other. That, I think, will become a much more powerful feature of teaching over the next few years. It becomes much more personal, it's global, and the TSL reach is in 200 countries globally. And certainly we will see over the next 5 years the value of English language education globally double from about 9 billion to an 18 billion pound industry, because every aspirant parent anywhere in the world wants their children to be taught in English because it's the language of business. So that means those resources are going to become richer, and it's an opportunity for us to export our teaching, export our resources, but it's an opportunity for us to learn from each other. And I think this sector has a particular ability to offer the world resources for teaching gifted and talented students in particular. But you will have other ideas about what your specialisms are and what you can offer. But I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Of course, that doesn't amount to anything if you can't access the technology at home, because fundamental to what I'm arguing is technology should be something you can do whenever you like, when it's convenient to you. And we did a home access scheme here in the UK. It proved very successful, but crucially, it helped attainment, it extended opportunities to learn, it improved that key relationship between home and school, and improved the employability skills of children and families, because everyone became more interested in the technology because their children were learning through it. But if you're going to do it now, you would, I think, embrace bring your own device to school. And we've got a bit of an issue about mobile phones, but the business case to me is a no-brainer. Most children now have smartphones. I went to a secondary school in Hounslow in the Heathrow flight path towards the end of last term. They had surveyed their incoming Year 7s to find out how many of them owned their own smartphone. Hounslow is not an advantaged part of the country. Only one child coming into Year 7 didn't own their own smartphone. So all they had to worry about to be digitally inclusive was that one child, and then they could think about the learning power of having internet in every child's palm in the classroom. And I think there's all sorts of reasons why we should be thinking hard about how we use these, how we make them interoperable with each other, so learners can share with each other using their handhelds, they can share with the teacher, and they can share with the wall. In the end, that's what we're after. Bring your own device, I think, is very much part of the future. And then education technology becomes consumer technology, and consumer technology is about homeschool, one-to-one. So cloud computing will be a question that you'll be wrestling with at the moment. Parents paying for the device, for the technical support, for recharging the thing overnight, because they now have a battery life that lasts through the school day. And schools saving on power, saving on, frankly, 20th century notions of IT suites, on the extent of technical support, and paper textbooks. So a really strong business case. You do have to tackle this phones in school problem. I mean, when I was at my wonderful school, I have to confess, we did abuse the technology of the day. Bad things were said about each other and teachers, normally on the walls of the toilets with a pen. I'm very happy to say my school didn't propose banning the pen. But they had rules about the misuse of the technology, and I think we should do exactly the same thing with these. And then you can do more learning through play and research, have that flexible classrooms, have the new pedagogy. And then we get to this, which is, and it's a slide that I put together when I was going to do a day with Pearson, probably the largest education business in the world. By coincidence, Pearson had pretty much exactly the same slide that they were going to show me, showing what they thought the direction of travel was. So this isn't just me, this is, in the end, where the commercial world sees things going. So moving from an emphasis on teaching to an emphasis on learning, from differentiated teaching to more personalised learning. from school-based learning to something that's much more distributed between the home, other environments and the school, and then from education technology to consumer technology. And then I'll finish what I've got to say, not because Apple occasionally pay me money, do I want to say something about Steve Jobs, but when I spoke to the Headmasters Conference in October, that day was the day that Steve Jobs died, and I was quite surprised by the extent of the reaction. And what I said when I spoke then in the seminar was, and I made it up, but it helped sum up what I've been talking about, is imagine if Steve Jobs had gone into education rather than technology. What would his school have been like? Well, his school, I think, would have been an exciting place to work, but very well led, very strongly led by someone who was irritatingly obsessed by the customer experience, by the learner experience, and making sure that everything had been thought through within the school to make the learning as intuitive and engaging as possible. And it wouldn't be known as Steve Jobs' school, it would have been known as the Apple School. We'll assume that he would have named it after a piece of fruit. And it would be a place that everyone would want to go to, where you wouldn't want a holiday, you'd want to get up every morning. Every learner would be itching to get in there and intuitively get into it. It probably wouldn't even have rules. Yeah, my devices, my iPad that I run this from, and the phone that I've been using as a remote, none of those came with instructions because it was so intuitive and it was a place you want to go and play in. And that's the school enabled by technology that we're all driving for. That's truly interactive. That's a real learning place that you just want to be in, where you just want to explore and find out more and develop yourself. And that's what we're all after. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much for your attention.
Jim, brilliant talk, thank you very much indeed. Jim doesn't know this, I was at school with him, and the only technological development I can remember was the construction of the language laboratory, which contributed to my failing my French O-level, because I spent most of the time learning how to splice together the broken tapes. But that was a long time ago. Jim has reminded us that IT is a tool which, if well used, can improve attainment, because it's evolving and interactive. And it's great that he has himself personally given ICT such a big push in the education sector in this country, not least through the academies that he supported. And it's also, as you said, great that Gove has picked this up in the last week. And his speech is on the DFE website. It's well worth looking at. So many ideas this morning. We're very grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed for finding the time to come and address us. Thank you.